Hey guys, welcome back. So in today's video, we're going to be working on the 8th Leetcode problem in which we have to convert a string to an integer. And so I'll just explain what the problem is going to be. All we have to do is that if we're given an integer, a string like this, with I guess the string versions of our integers, then we want to return the integer that is within that string. And so if we input 42, the string version, we should return the integer version of 42. If we input negative 42, we should return the string version of negative 42. We should return negative 42, the integer version. And a couple things we should note is that if we look at this example, if we only want to return the number parts of our string, and the second we reach a letter, we can just return our number. And in this case, if we start off with a letter, then with a letter that's not a number or is not a negative or positive sign, then we just need to output 0. And at the very end, we just need to handle for our kind of boundaries to make sure that our number isn't bigger or smaller than our boundary range. But we'll handle for that at the very end. So the two functions, or the two Python functions we're going to make use of, are the ORD function and the CHR function. And so what they are is basically they return either a string or integer representation of the input that you give. So if we look at this example, the ORD with the input of the string version of 0, it returns a 48. And so this 48 is an integer representation of the string version of 0. And this doesn't just apply to the string, like the string version of our numerical numbers. If we input lowercase a, then it returns 97. And so you can really input any string you want, and it's gonna return a well, not any string you want, but if you input a string, and it doesn't just have to be the numerical versions, it can be other types of strings as well, and it's going to return a numerical integer, a numerical representation of that string. And the opposite goes for the CHR function. And so if you input an integer in the CHR function, it's going to return the string version or string representation of that integer. So if we look here, this is the opposite of the ORD function. If we input a 48, it's going to return the string version of our 0. And so the reason we're using this is because we can make use of our ORD function. And so what we're going to do is if we're looking at a string version of our numerical integers, if we input that string version in our numerical integers, since within this ORD function, the way it's set up is we have 0 through 9, and so the way it's set up, the string version of our 4 is 4 units higher, or 4 spots, the integer, or 4 spots higher than the 0 integer, the integer representation of our string of our 0. And so it's just a little easier to understand if we look at it. If we do ORD of our string version of 4, and we subtract that from the ORD subtract that minus ORD, and we input the string version of our 0, it's going to return 4. And that's because if we print out ORD 4, it returns 52, and we already saw earlier that our ORD 0 is 48. And so if we subtract 52 minus 48, it's going to return 4, which is a string representation of our string 4. And so we're going to be using this little subtraction to return the integer versions of our strings. And so hopefully that made a little sense. It's just it's playing around with the integer representations of our strings and doing a little subtraction to get what we want. And so I have the function over here in our Google Doc, and I think we can start coding right away. So the first thing I'm going to do is if we look at this example here, there's a couple spaces that we want to get rid of. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say string is equal to string.strip. And so we're just going to strip all the empty, string.strip. We just want to get rid of all of our spaces within our string, so that is just one continuous thing. And then the next thing we want to do is I'm gonna create a new string, and I'm gonna put the numbers inside them. And so basically what it's gonna be, I'm gonna call in nums, make it equal to something, and make it equal to a string, and I'm gonna input 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. And so these are going to be the string versions of our numbers, and this is to make sure that whatever we're looking at is, if it's not a negative or positive sign, it's within this nums string, so that we know that we're looking at a number. And so now the first thing I'm gonna handle for is whether if we have a negative or positive sign at the very front. So what I'm gonna say is if string 0 is equal to the negative, I'm gonna say is negative is equal to true, because that means we're dealing with a negative number. And then I'm gonna say our string is equal to our string 1 colon. And so this is just gonna return everything from, if you can imagine stripping these spaces, after we handle for our negative, it's gonna return everything from the 4 onwards. And so that's what that does. If we look at this example, it's gonna handle for the negative, and then it's gonna return the rest of the string from the 1 index onwards. And the index 1 is inclusive. And so that is for if it's a negative minus sign. If it's a positive sign, then it's going to be very similar, except is negative will be false, and then our string is equal to our string 1 colon. So again, we're returning the rest of the string. Elif string 0 not in nums. So at this point, we've handled for our negative, we've handled for our positive. If at this point we haven't gone through those lines of codes, then that means the very first letter we have in our string is not a number. If we run this and this returns true, because it can't be anything else. And so in that case, we're just going to return 0, which is what it wants us to do here. If the first letter is W, we just want to output 0. And at the very end, since at this point it's just a normal number, like in this case, then or not in that case, like this case where the first supposedly letter in our string is within our num string. If that's the case, we're just going to say is negative is equal to false. And so that is how we can handle for the first string in our array, the first letter in our string. And I'm going to call anything in here letters, and then our outputs are going to be integers. And so now we can handle for actually converting. And so what we're going to say, I'm going to create a variable called cur_num and make it equal to 0. And so this is just going to be the variable that this is just going to be the integer version of our string. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say for letter in string, first we're going to check if letter not in nums, we're just going to return the cur_num. Or actually no, we're going to break, because we want to handle for our boundaries at the very end. But for now we're going to break, so this is going to break out of our for loop. And if that's not the case, and our letter is in our nums string, then what we're going to say is we're going to say our digit is equal to our ord of our letter minus ord of 0. And so what this is doing, if we look at the very first number here, if we're going to be running the ord function with this string 4 as an input, like we did in this example here. We're going to be doing this, and then we're subtracting from the ord 0, and that's going to return the integer version of the string, because 52 minus 48 is going to be the difference is 4. And so that's what the digit is going to be initialized with. And then we're going to say cur_num is equal to cur_num times 10. So what the multiplying by 10 does is it shifts our whole number over. So say hypothetically our current number before this was 32, multiplying it by 10 will make it 320. And so now we can add our digit so that we can add it on to the ones place. So now we say our number is digit is 4, it'll be 324. And so that's how we can handle for adding to our current num. And then at the very end, now we want to check to see if our number is negative. So if our number was negative, then we want to do some things. First, we want to make sure that we handle for our boundaries. And so if we're working with positive numbers, technically we want to see if our number is greater than 2 to the power of 31, because the opposite of our negative version of 2 to the power of 31 is going to be 2 to the power of 31. And since we're only dealing with positive numbers at this point, since we removed our negative sign up here by doing this, since we're only working with our positive versions of our strings, we want to check if cur_num is greater than 2 to the power of 31. Then we want to return -1 times 2 to the power of 31. If that's not the case, we're just going to return -1 times cur_num. And so that is just making sure that our number isn't bigger than the lower boundary. And else, if our is negative is not false, we want to check to see if our cur_num is greater than, in this case, 2 to the power of 31 minus 1. So I'm going to create -1. And if that's the case, we want to return 2 to the power of 31 minus 1. Else, we just want to return our cur_num. And so this is handling for our boundaries and making sure that our positive versions of our final outputs are not greater than the boundaries that are set for us. And so that is the whole function. Now I'm gonna quickly try to type it in. First, I'm gonna change the variable because it's not good practice to name a variable with str, because that's already a Python function. And so I decided to change it to a string. And so the first thing I'm going to do, string.strip. And if you don't know what the str function does, it just converts an integer to a string, or yeah. And so you can use it to convert things to string, but that's not the point of this. Initialize 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 0. And I'm going to say if string 0 is equal to r minus is negative is equal to true, string is equal to string 1 plus string 0 positive is negative is equal to false, string is equal to string 1 positive of string 0 not in nums, return 0, else not return is negative is equal to false, cur_num is equal to 0 for letter in string if letter not in nums, break digit is equal to word letter. And you can see in this case when I type word, the color of the text changes because Leetcode knows that it's a Python function. Cur_num plus digit. At the very end, if it is negative, if cur_num is greater than 2 to the power of 31, return -1 times 2 to the power of 31, plus return -1 times cur_num, else if cur_num. And so now I'm just gonna bring up the console and run it on a few of these test cases to make sure that they work. And so we return 42. I'll add a couple spaces there and hopefully return negative 42 in that case. Return negative 42. Hopefully this will return 4,193. It does. I'm just going to add a string on the front to make sure that works. It returns 0. And then at the very end, I'm just going to input a large number that returns, this is equal to negative 2 to the power of, negative 1 times 2 to the power of 31. And so this returns the number that we want. And so I'm going to hit submit, and hopefully this will pass all the Leetcode cases underneath. And oh, we need to handle for if our strings are empty. And so once we strip our string, if len string is equal to 0, I believe we just want to return 0. Let me just run that to make sure that we're supposed to return 0. Okay. I'm just gonna assume we're supposed to return 0, and hopefully that's right. And so if we hit submit, oh, I never added it in here. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, so it looks like our function works, and I forgot to look for this edge case, but other than that, this is how we can convert our string integers to our string integers to our numerical integers. Hopefully this is helpful for you guys, and until then, see you guys in the next one. All right, later.